Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take source materials, commentaries, articles, lexical aids, and really try to dig into them, pull out the core insights for you.
Yep, no surface skimming here. We go deep.
And today we're tackling, well, a really significant verse, Genesis 3.16.
That's right. God's verdict on the woman right after the fall in Eden. It's a verse that carries a lot of weight and, frankly, a lot of historical baggage in terms of interpretation.
And just so you know where we're coming from, we approach this from a perspective we call reformed thinking.
It means we're committed to a specific kind of careful reading.
Our goal today is pretty focused. We want to clearly separate what belongs to God's good creation design in Genesis 2.
The harmony, the original intent,
From what Genesis 3 describes as the consequence, the distortion that sin brings into the picture.
and doing that means paying really close attention to the Hebrew text itself and how that theme develops across the whole Bible, the canonical trajectory.
That distinction, creation versus fall, is just so vital here.
Oh, absolutely. Without it, Genesis 3.16 gets twisted. People can read it as God commanding certain sinful dynamics, like harsh male rule,
Instead of seeing it for what it is.
which is a diagnosis, a prediction of how sin corrupts these beautiful creation gifts, specifically fruitfulness, motherhood, and the marriage relationship.
So our job is to draw that line really clearly. God's order versus sin's distortion. Okay, so let's get right into the text. The grammar seems like the first hurdle, maybe the most important one.
It really is foundational.
Especially that second part of the verdict, and he shall rule over you. The big question pops up immediately. Is God commanding the man to rule in a certain way, maybe a harsher way now, or is he just, stating what's going to happen next in this broken world?
And the grammar itself gives us the answer quite clearly, actually, when you look closely. Genesis 3.16 isn't a command. It's what theologians call a judicial oracle of consequence, meaning it functions as a forecast, a prediction of what life will be like now under the curse of sin. It's not a warrant, not a license for bad behavior. Getting this wrong has led to, well, serious ethical problems throughout church history.
But that word rule, mashal, in Hebrew, it sounds so authoritative. How can we be sure God isn't maybe adjusting the husband's role after the fall, giving him a new directive?
Yeah, it is an authoritative word, no doubt.
Yeah.
But the specific form of the verb used here is key. That's the technical signpost we need.
Okay.
The verb is yimshel. Now, that's the imperfect form of mashal, to rule, to govern.
Imperfect tense. So usually future action or ongoing action, right? Like he will rule or he shall rule. It points forward.
Precisely. The form is predictive. It's an indicative forecast. It states what will be the reality going forward. He will rule over you. It describes the dynamic that sin has introduced.
So it's not telling him to rule. It's saying this is what ruling is going to tend towards now.
Exactly. It's not an imperative mood, which would be a direct command like rule over her. And it's not optative, expressing a wish like may he rule. If God wanted to command a new, harsher way of relating, he would have used a different Hebrew construction altogether.
Yeah.
Adjussive, maybe, or a cohortative, not just the simple indicative imperfect.
Okay, so the grammar itself frames this as like a grim weather forecast for human relationships post-fall. Expect friction, expect domination as a tendency.
That's a good way to put it. It's describing this new, unfortunate tendency.
Yeah.
The husband's leadership, which was intended in Genesis 2 to be protective, self-giving, harmonious.
Right.
Now, after the fall, is predicted to lean towards being heavy-handed, maybe even domineering, self-interested. God is reporting what will happen, which is actually the husband's sinful inclination towards harshness. He's not giving him permission to be harsh. That predicted harshness, that's pure Genesis 3. It belongs to the fall, not the created order.
Wow. That flips the common reading, doesn't it? It means if a husband is cruel or domineering, he's not obeying Genesis 3.16.
Not at all.
He's actually fulfilling the curse. He's acting out the negative prediction.
Exactly right. And that grammatical point makes the later New Testament commands against harshness make perfect sense. They are directly counteracting this predicted fallen tendency.
And you see this predictive nature earlier in the verse too, right?
Yes, the first part about childbearing, in pain you shall bear children. The verb there, teledi, you shall bear, is also predictive. It reinforces that same tone. God is outlining the certain sorrow, the ḥiṣṣābôn, that will now accompany the blessing of having children.
So the whole verse hangs together grammatically as a diagnosis.
A diagnosis of the conflict, the toil, the pain that now characterizes life outside of Eden. It diagnoses the problem. It doesn't prescribe it.
Okay, so the sources say Genesis 3.16 diagnoses the warping of two creational blessings, Fruitfulness and marriage. Let's dig into that first one. Motherhood, fruitfulness. Genesis 1.28 gives this wonderful command, be fruitful and multiply. Simple, unburdened. But Genesis 3.16 adds this layer of pain. What's the specific language God uses? It sounds quite severe.
It is severe. And it's important to see that the blessing itself isn't revoked. Children are still gifts, fruitfulness is still valued. But the experience of bringing forth life is radically changed. Sorrow, deep effort, toil, ḥiṣṣābôn gets added onto it.
Making it hard, painful, maybe even dangerous.
Yes. The easy joy is gone, replaced by something that involves struggle and resistance.
And the sources mentioned an intensifying structure right at the start of God's words to the woman.
They did. It's a classic Hebrew intensification. God says, harba harba. Literally, multiplying, I will multiply.
So like, I will greatly multiply or I will surely multiply.
Exactly. It uses an infinitive absolute form with the main verb. It underlines the certainty and the sheer magnitude of this consequence. This isn't just a minor discomfort. It's a significant increase in grief and toil. It's unavoidable in this fallen world.
And what exactly gets multiplied? The sources point out an interesting grammatical structure, two things linked together.
Yes, it's a double direct object, and it's quite telling. He says, he will multiply two things, joined tightly together. First, ḥiṣṣābôn.
We mentioned that word already. Pain, toil, sorrowful effort.
Right. The sense of work, meeting resistance, and second, hērōn, which means conception or pregnancy.
Ah, okay. So not just multiplying the pain of childbirth, but multiplying the pain in the pregnancy itself, or maybe the pain associated with pregnancy. That's broader than how it's often understood.
It really is. Many translations focus just on pain in childbearing, localizing it to labor and delivery. But the Hebrew pairs ḥiṣṣābôn, the sorrowful toil, directly with hērōn, the whole process from conception onwards.
So the grief, the difficulty, it stretches across the entire experience.
That seems to be the point. The sorrow isn't just in the final moments of birth. It encompasses the whole journey. The physical discomforts of pregnancy, the anxieties, the emotional drain, the vulnerability, maybe even the grief of infertility or miscarriage, which is also bound up in this sphere. The entire maternal realm, from conception through raising children in a difficult world, is now marked by ḥiṣṣābôn. The multiplication applies to both the state of pregnancy and the sorrow connected to it.
And that word, ḥiṣṣābôn, you said it connects directly to the man's sentence.
Yes, and this is critical for seeing the shared consequence of the fall. That exact same noun, ḥiṣṣābôn, appears immediately in Genesis 3.17, describing the man's struggle.
What does it say there?
God tells Adam, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain, same word at the born, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles, sweat of the brow. He's the same concept. Work now involves painful toil and resistance.
So the woman experiences ḥiṣṣābôn in her sphere, childbearing and nurture, and the man experiences ḥiṣṣābôn in his sphere, cultivating the ground, providing. Both foundational human tasks are now marked by the same kind of frustrating struggle.
Precisely. It shows the curse affects humanity comprehensively. The mandate to be fruitful remains, the mandate to work the ground remains, but both are now shot through with friction, sorrow, and resistance.
The sources used a phrase like, the gifts now bear thorns.
That captures it well. Fruitfulness is still a gift, food from the earth is still a gift, but accessing these gifts now involves pain. And understanding this shared ḥiṣṣābôn helps us see why the path to redemption, hinted at in Genesis 3.15 with the seed of the woman, why that path necessarily involves suffering and groaning. The solution comes through the pain, not by avoiding it.
Okay, let's shift to the second warped blessing identified in the sources. The marriage relationship. This part of the verse introduces that really interesting and apparently very rare Hebrew word, ċhejuka, usually translated desire. Just how rare is it, and why does that matter so much?
It's incredibly rare. It only appears 3 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. Just 3.
Wow, only 3 times.
Yeah. And when a word is that infrequent, you can't just look it up in a dictionary and get a simple definition. You have to rely almost entirely on the immediate context of those 3 specific passages to figure out what it means. The canon itself has to define the word for us.
Okay, so the first instance is here in Genesis 3.16. Your desire, ķejuka, shall be for or toward your husband. What are the other 2 places it shows up?
Well, the second one is very close by in the next chapter, Genesis 4.7. And the context there is stark. It's about conflict, jealousy, potential violence.
That's God speaking to Cain, right? Before he kills Abel.
Exactly. God warns Cain, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire, same word, chukka, is for you or against you, but you must rule over it.
Okay, that's striking. Sin has a desire for Cain. That doesn't sound like affection. It sounds aggressive, predatory, like it wants to control him.
Precisely. Sin's chukka in 4.7 is clearly hostile. It's a drive to master, to dominate Cain. And notice the parallel. Just like in 3.16, you have chishwa desire paired with the concept of ruling over, mashal. Cain is told to rule over sin's desire.
So that parallel desire meeting rule shows up in both verses. That makes it hard to read the desire in 3.16 as just like romantic longing, doesn't it? Especially given the context of judgment and curse.
It makes a purely positive reading very difficult. The Genesis 4.7 parallels strongly suggest that the shudra in the marriage relationship post-fall is now tangled up with conflict, maybe a struggle for control or at least some kind of friction. It implies a tension, an impulse met by a counter-rule. It's not the easy harmony of Eden anymore.
But wait, there are 3 occurrences. What's the third one? Does it also point to conflict?
Ah, no. The third one provides the crucial contrast, the other end of the spectrum. It's in the Song of Solomon, chapter 7, verse 10.
Okay, that's a very different book.
Very different context. It's
Yeah.
poetry celebrating marital love and intimacy. The beloved says, I am my beloved's, and his desire, Teshuka, is for me.
Ah, so there it is, positive. It's about mutual delight, devotion, maybe longing in a good sense.
Exactly. In the Song of Solomon, Teshuka clearly expresses healthy, reciprocal, joyful desire within the marriage bond, the ideal.
So the word itself, chukwa, can span this whole range from sin's aggressive desire to dominate Cain all the way to the beautiful mutual desire in the Song of Solomon.
That's the key takeaway. The word itself isn't inherently negative or positive. Its meaning depends entirely on the context.
And the context of Genesis 3.16 is, well, it's the fall. It's God pronouncing judgment and consequences for sin. It follows deception and rebellion. It's paired with predictions of pain and toil.
Right. Given that immediate judicial context and the very strong grammatical and thematic link to the conflict scenario in Genesis 4.7, just verses later, the most likely meaning of terqua in Genesis 3.16 leans towards something disordered.
A desire that's somehow gone wrong, misdirected, maybe even contentious.
Yes, it points to a distortion in the relationship, marked by friction, maybe a power struggle, rather than the original peaceful complementarity of Genesis 2. The fall introduces conflict right into the heart of the marriage.
I remember the sources mentioning the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation. How did they handle terqua here?
That's interesting, too. The Septuagint uses a Greek word, apostrophe, which means something like turning towards or returning. It suggests a strong orientation, a leaning towards the husband.
Which could fit with longing, maybe.
It could. But in the negative context of Genesis 3, even that turning towards might be seen as problematic, perhaps an unhealthy dependence, or a longing that's destined to be frustrated by the husband's predicted sinful tendency to rule harshly, or maybe a turning against in the sense of vying for control. Either way, the harmony is broken. Whether it's a drive to control clashing with his rule or a frustrated longing meeting his domination, the result predicted is marital strife.
Okay, so putting it together, we have this rare word toshu, likely indicating some kind of disordered desire or impulse in this fallen context,
Right.
paired with the predictive verb yimush, he shall rule, pointing to a tendency towards harsh governance. It creates this dynamic the sources called an impulse that meets a counter rule.
A recipe for conflict, essentially.
Yeah. So let's break down what the sources suggest are the specific tendencies predicted for both the wife and the husband. The big picture is that the unity and peace of Genesis 2 are now fractured by this new pattern of conflict.
And the verse diagnoses how sin corrupts each of them in their specific creational callings within the marriage. His leadership gets distorted. Her relational posture gets distorted. Both drift from selflessness towards self-assertion in different ways.
Let's look at the wife's side first, the distortion related to chukwa. The sources seem to offer 2 main ways to understand this disordered desire, both leading to conflict.
That's right. The first way emphasizes that turning towards idea, maybe from the Septuagint, but reads it as a misdirected or perhaps even a desperate longing.
How so?
The idea is that the woman retains a deep God-given desire for connection, for security, for intimacy with her husband. But in the fallen world, this legitimate longing now often runs into his sinfulness, his harshness, his indifference, his failure to love her as he should. So her desire, her chokwa, becomes a source of frustration, pain, and conflict because it's constantly being unmet or even exploited by his sinful rule, mashal.
Okay, so that's one possibility, a good desire that gets painfully twisted because of his sin. What's the second reading? It sounded more active on her part.
Yes, the second reading leans much more heavily on that Genesis 4.7 parallel, where sin's teshuka was aggressive. This reading sees the wife's teshuka as a drive to control, or at least contend with, her husband.
Like a power struggle.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
An urge to usurp his position, perhaps, or to manipulate or to resist his leadership in a way that creates strife. If sin's chuku is its desire to master Cain, maybe the woman's chuku is predicted to be a similar desire to master or control her husband. This impulse then inevitably collides, as one source put it, with his own predicted tendency to rule Yimish, maybe even rule harshly. It becomes a battle of wills.
So under the fall, the prediction is either her longing meets his domination, creating friction, or her drive to control meets his drive to dominate, also creating friction.
Correct. Whichever specific nuance you land on, and scholars debate this, the result is the same. The chajika, her fundamental relational drive, becomes disordered. It's no longer operating in the harmonious way intended in Genesis 2.
Yeah.
It leads towards sin, whether through resentment and frustration or through active rivalry and contention. The unity is broken.
Okay, now let's flip to the husband's side. The distortion of his rule, the mashal. How does sin corrupt his role?
Well, the prediction, "and he shall rule over you," Yimarsh, points directly to the way his God-given headship or leadership gets twisted by sin. What should have been, in Genesis 2, a gentle, protective, self-sacrificial headship is now predicted to tend towards harshness, severity, maybe even tyranny. It becomes self-serving rather than other-serving. He uses his authority for his own convenience or benefit, not primarily for her good.
The sources said mashal easily shades toward heavy-handed dominance in a fallen world.
It does. That's the predicted sinful tendency for the husband. Harshness, selfishness, a domineering spirit. Again, crucially, this is a prediction of his sin, not a prescription for his behavior. God is diagnosing what fallen male leadership often looks like, not endorsing it. He takes the authority God entrusted to him and misuses it, turns it into a tool for control instead of care.
So this really establishes a clear line, doesn't it? It's vital for any kind of pastoral application or understanding Christian marriage.
Absolutely critical.
Legitimate, loving, servant-hearted headship that belongs to the good creation order of Genesis 2, but harshness, domination, cruelty, selfishness, and leadership that belongs squarely to the fall, Genesis 3.
That's the line.
So anyone trying to use Genesis 3.1 simp to justify being a harsh or controlling husband is completely misreading the text. They're identifying with the curse, not with God's design or his remedy.
Precisely. They are embodying the predicted distortion, not obeying a divine command. The verse diagnoses the tendency. The rest of Scripture, especially the Gospel, provides the cure by demanding he resist that very tendency.
Okay, this diagnosis is pretty grim. Warped fruitfulness leading to sorrowful toil, warped marriage leading to conflict and domination. It paints a picture of struggle. But, as the sources stress, the Bible doesn't just leave us with a diagnosis, it provides the remedy.
Thank goodness, yes. The story doesn't end in Genesis 3.
So how does the rest of Scripture, particularly the Gospel, address and begin to heal this specific brokenness predicted in Genesis 3.16? What's the hope for Christian families living this side of the fall?
The Bible's trajectory essentially takes this diagnostic report from Genesis 3 and turns it into marching orders for believers. It tells us how, empowered by the Spirit, we are to actively resist these fallen tendencies and reclaim the harmony of Genesis 2. The cure is applied specifically to both the toil of motherhood and the conflict in marriage.
All right, let's start with motherhood again. How does the Bible offer hope and a path forward through that predicted ḥiṣṣābôn, the sorrowful toil?
Well, the hope starts immediately after the verdict, back in Genesis 3.15. The promise of the seed of the woman who will crush the serpent. Notice, the victory comes through the woman, through childbearing, the very sphere that was just marked with intensified pain.
So the path to victory runs through the groans, not around them.
Exactly. The solution isn't escaping the pain, but finding redemption within it and through it. The pain becomes, in a sense, the context for God's greatest work.
And the New Testament really picks up on this, right? Framing salvation itself in these terms.
It does, powerfully. Galatians 4.4, the Redeemer arrives, born of woman. Salvation enters the world right through the G3.16 reality of conception and birth. And Jesus himself uses this metaphor.
The labor pains metaphor.
Yes, in John 16.21, he compares the disciples' coming sorrow over his death and indeed all suffering leading to the kingdom to a woman in labor.
What's he say?
When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. He's interpreting history through this lens. Intense sorrow, yes, but leading to ultimate forget the pain joy. It acknowledges the reality of the ģiṣṣābôn, but frames it as temporary and purposeful, leading to resurrection life.
And Paul uses it too.
Romans 8.22. The whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. He universalizes the metaphor. All creation is experiencing this Genesis 3 ģiṣṣābôn, longing for the final redemption. So the pain is real, it's pervasive, but it's moving towards something glorious.
Okay, so hope for the ģiṣṣābôn comes through seeing it as the context for redemption, fulfilled in Christ. Now, what about the marriage conflict? The clash between Teshuvah and Machal, how does the New Testament fix that specific distortion?
Here, the New Testament does something brilliant. It strongly reaffirms the Genesis 2 creation order, distinct roles, headship belonging to the husband, rooted in creation before the fall. Paul mentions man being formed first, for instance.
So it doesn't erase the Genesis 2 structure.
Not at all. It upholds it. But it directly targets the Genesis 3 distortion of that structure. It provides the explicit cure for the predicted conflict.
How does it cure the husband's tendency, that ģiṣṣābōn's tendency towards harshness?
It gives him a radically different model for leadership. Instead of domination, he gets Christ. Ephesians 5.25 is the classic text. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
So love defined by self-sacrifice, not self-assertion.
Exactly. Christ's authority was cruciform, expressed in dying for the beloved. That's the model. It directly opposes the Genesis 3 prediction of heavy-handed rule. And just to make sure it lands, Colossians 3.19 says it bluntly. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them.
Do not be harsh. A direct command counteracting the G3 prediction.
Couldn't be clearer. And 1 Peter 3.7 adds that husbands should live with their wives in an understanding way, showing them honor as co-heirs of the grace of life. All of this binds his authority to love, understanding, honor, and self-sacrifice, the complete opposite of the G3 tendency.
Okay, so the gospel fundamentally redefines husbandly authority in terms of Christ's love, curing the ģiṣṣābōn distortion. What about the wife's side? Addressing that potentially disordered teshuvah, whether it's rivalry or frustrated longing.
For the wife, the New Testament also calls her back to the Genesis 2 ideal, but purified by the gospel. Passages like 1 Peter 3 encourage a gentle and quiet spirit, focusing on godly character and respectful behavior, even towards an unbelieving husband sometimes. It's about a willing, intelligent deference rooted in her relationship with God, not a cowering submission born out of fear or the G3 conflict.
So not erasing her desire or her personhood, but channeling her relational energy towards godliness and respect, rather than rivalry or resentment.
Yes. It calls her away from the G3 tendency towards strife and towards the G2 ideal of harmonious partnership, enabled by faith in Christ. The goal for both husband and wife is to live out the Genesis 2 pattern, empowered by the gospel to resist the Genesis 3 distortions.
Now, thinking about this through our Reformed thinking lens, how do resources like the Westminster Confession or catechisms help guard against misusing Genesis 3.16, especially to justify abuse?
Well, first, the Confession, WCF chapter 6, frames all this disorder, the harshness, the rivalry, as flowing from original sin. It's part of our fallen condition, not God's approved plan.
Right, it's sin, not righteousness.
But the ethical application in the catechisms is really helpful too. The larger catechism, when explaining the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, applies it broadly to all authority relationships.
Superiors and inferiors, it calls them.
Yes, and it explicitly lists the sins of superiors. Things like undue severity, provoking children to wrath, oppression, cruel usage. It directly condemns the very harshness that Genesis 3.16 predicts as a tendency of fallen male leadership.
So the confessional standards themselves provide a strong ethical barrier against interpreting G3.16 as permission for cruelty. Severity is explicitly called sin.
Exactly. It gives the church clear grounds to say, no, that behavior is not biblical leadership. It's sinful severity condemned by God's law.
Which leads to practical action for the church.
It has to. Churches must actively denounce cruelty and abuse. They must exercise discipline against unrepentant men who are harsh or domineering. The sources emphasize that biblical submission never means enduring abuse or criminal behavior. Elders have a duty to protect the vulnerable, ensure safety, which might mean separation, and involve civil authorities, based on Romans 13, when laws are broken. The church must actively fight against the curse's effects.
And what about that other side of the curse, the ģiṣṣābōn, the toil and sorrow in motherhood? How should churches practically respond to that ongoing reality?
Pastoral care has to be concrete here. It means walking alongside families experiencing the real pains of Genesis 3.16. That could be the physical exhaustion of pregnancy or postpartum struggles, the deep grief of miscarriage or infertility, the challenges of raising children with special needs, or simply the daily grind.
So practical help.
Yes, providing meals, offering childcare, maybe financial assistance where toil leads to poverty. Supporting adoption and orphan care as ways of expressing fruitfulness beyond biological birth, as James 1.27 encourages. It's about acknowledging the reality of the groaning while demonstrating the self-giving love of Christ that begins the healing process even before the final restoration. We live between the diagnosis and the full cure.
Okay, so Genesis 3.16 gives us this stark diagnosis, explaining why these core human experiences, creating life, forming families, are so often filled with both blessing and pain. But the Bible doesn't stop there. It unfolds the cure through Christ.
That's right. The creation order of Genesis 2, with its distinct roles and harmonious design, is affirmed. But the fallen tendencies of Genesis 3, domination, rivalry, sorrowful toil, are diagnosed as sin and its effects. The gospel then provides the power through Christ's sacrifice and the Holy Spirit to resist those tendencies and live increasingly according to the original Genesis 2 pattern of love, respect, and mutual flourishing.
So to wrap up our deep dive on Genesis 3.16, we've seen it's fundamentally a diagnosis, not a command. It describes how sin warps two key creation gifts. Motherhood, marked by multiplied sorrow, and marriage, marked by a conflict dynamic involving a disordered desire, tashuk, met by a tendency towards harsh rule, Michelle.
We saw the grammar is key, Yimishal is predictive, forecasting the fallen tendency, not commanding it. Harshness is part of the curse, not God's blueprint. And the cure comes through the gospel, which reaffirms the Genesis 2 structure, but empowers believers to resist the G3 distortions through Christ-like love and respect.
And for our final thought, something for you, our listener, to consider further. Think about that shared word, ḥiṣṣābôn, sorrowful, frustrating toil. It links the woman's specific pain in the realm of bringing forth life with the man's specific pain in the realm of cultivating the earth, or more broadly, his work. This shared term suggests the fall created a world where all essential human work, whether maternal or vocational, now meets resistance. It pushes back against us.
That's a sobering connection.
So if that's true, how might our view of sanctification, of Christian growth, change if we see that actively resisting the predicted G3 tendencies, like the harshness, the rivalry, the despair in the face of toil, is itself a vital form of spiritual work? Could it be that the daily struggle for peace in our homes, for joy in our parenting, for integrity in our jobs despite the frustrations, is actually part of how we reclaim creation's goodness and fight back against the curse?
That turns the struggle itself into an arena for grace. The conflict isn't just out there. Resisting the G3 pull within us becomes the work of actively restoring God's original, peaceful design day by day. A powerful thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to getting into the sources with you again next time.